Hi everyone. Hope you're well. Um, I hope everyone's having a nice week. Thank God the weather's really starting to pick up again. Me and my weather comments, I'll never stop. But yeah, I wanted to come today to let you all know that as part of for my role at uni, I'm writing like a press release for these Thursday groups, and we're also recording a promotional video as well to try and spread the word and get more people to come along. So I was hoping that for that we could all if everyone wants to do this, you don't have to do this. I thought we could all like wave at the camera as kind of like something to do, like to kind of show that we're all here. It's a community. We're all having a good time, that kind of thing. How does that sound to everyone? Is everyone, if you don't want to do it, you can turn your camera off. That's totally fine. Names will be blurred out and things like that as well. And I'll be talking to Eva and Cecily afterwards to confirm any footage that I get. But is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, that will be hopefully a little bit of, oh, have I got it? I hope so. Yes, I did it. Brilliant. Yeah, so hopefully we can include that into our promotional video. And if you don't want to be in it, that's absolutely fine. Just I'll let Cecily Eva know and they'll let us know and we can remove you from it. And hopefully I will be back next week, and it'll be nice to get a few words from people about how they find the group, if they want to share that, and why other people should come along. It'll be great to try and gauge more interest that way. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. That's me done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was a good warm-up exercise as well. Thank you. So I think we'll dive into the title for today, which is climate change, mental health, and gender-based violence. So Cecily, if I can get you to share your screen for me, please. So we all know about climate change, which just refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. And I don't think when anybody hears climate change is a new thing. But I guess the combination of climate change, gender-based violence, and our well-being is something we need to link in. So climate change, as we've seen before, can affect our health, our wealth, our safety, our workplaces, and make us move. And the fight against climate change is not only just to save our planet, but it can also be seen as a crisis within a crisis. And this is where we find that climate change actually makes the risk of violence even higher. I'll explain. So in places where you see there's a lot of drought, so we're looking at developing countries, it means that these women have to probably walk further to get water, which then means they're able, because they have to change their route, it brings in more chances of them being harassed. Again, if there's drought, people's livestock dies. The girls are usually sold off early for people to have a livelihood. So it shows you how climate change does not just stop with what we see happening, but what's happening down the road. So we've got a few pictures here. I mean, we had the previous one, which was showing about the locust. I'll wait for this to come up. Yeah. So here is a good example where we had like locust invasion in Kenya, which actually destroyed lots of crops. Can you imagine those people rely on that to get their livelihood? We had a lot of droughts on there, fires, winds, tornadoes, lots of different climate change in terms of a lot of snow falling, which is unprecedented. And the violence as well, as we've looked at in developing countries, but the violence is not just limited to developing countries. Research has actually shown things that places that have bushfires and droughts are actually in the developed countries, and have found that there's a risk of domestic violence in those regions. I mean, when we talk about gender-based violence, we're talking about physical violence, verbal violence, psychological violence, sexual, socioeconomic violence, domestic violence, harassment, and sexual harassment. So as we look at climate change today, Cicely, you can put the next slide for me. It's important we just don't look at climate change as just climate change, but how it trickles down into our communities and how it's affecting other people. Look at the refugees, for instance. People have been displaced from their communities and moved to different countries. However, when they moved into these different countries, it creates isolation, which then sometimes can lead to gender-based violence. And this is why I want to tackle this issue and talk about it, create awareness. And when we talk also about gender-based violence, we know that it's normally against women and girls. So the world, and we're here to be more ambassadors about climate change, but how we can also be ambassadors against gender-based violence and combine the two and see how, if we try and tackle one thing, then we're trying to tackle other things as well, other crises that could be in a crisis. And this was something that was actually discussed in the COP26 climate change meeting. And the UK has actually said they're going to give 165 million in tackling climate change while addressing inequalities that make women and girls more vulnerable to climate change, and also empowering the women to be able to be a part of the climate change processes and solutions. So thank you. So what we'll do is, on this picture here, we can see how, of course, climate change, girls falling pregnant, which then limits their socioeconomic ability to be able to provide. So we need to, so I hope that has created a bit of a link while we're looking into this topic of climate change, mental health, gender-based violence. And as Cicely said, as we continue the conversations today, we hope that most of you will take up the role of being champions of gender-based violence, but looking to tackle all these things. So as we normally do, I'll bring up the polls. I see, yeah, I'll bring up the polls and then we will continue this conversation. But I just wanted, before we do the polls, did anybody want to react to that at all and say something before we continue? We're good. Okay, so I'm just going to launch the polls. So today we've got 2 questions. So how much do you think climate change impacts on mental health and gender-based violence? And 2, how much do you think human activity contributes to climate change and its impact on mental health and gender-based violence? I'll give you 2 minutes and then we'll come back and have a discussion around these questions. Okay, so I can see most of us have done the poll, so I'll just end. Alex, welcome. So I'll let Alex run us through the poll. So I'm just gonna end this.
Okay, so question 1, most people answered very much. So that's really interesting. I also answered very much, but I'd like to hear what you guys think, why you answered very much. So as Eva was just discussing, like these 2 things can be heavily impacting upon each other, especially in countries that are most affected by climate change with, you know, climate refugees and things. So does anyone have any thoughts? Annette, would you like to speak?
Yeah, as you say about climate change, obviously it's an impact on people's lives. And obviously if you're being really affected by climate change, it may be flood, it may be whatever the impact is, people become displaced. You know, they're having to leave their homes, you know, or they know, and they may not ever likely to return there again. Of course, that's going to have an impact on their mental health, you know, and it's an abandonment. They're no longer part of their community as they know it. So it will impact on them, you know, a large degree. And of course, you know, this is something that's affecting, you know, everywhere in the world. Now you're getting floods, landslides, you know, people's livelihoods lost. And again, you can say, you know, how much do you think it really can impact and are impacting on people's lives? It's a fact. You can't dispute it, because you can see the correlation. You know, imagine you're uprooted from where you are, you're having to leave your country, everything you know, and on top of that, you know, your family are dying, you're losing family members, you know, from a flood, you know, yeah, and all their livelihoods been washed away, you know, like the locusts that impacted. I mean, all those farmers, you know, that their livelihood for their family, what happens next? So it does have an impact on your mental health,
Yeah,
and as your well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I did geography at uni and in A level, and you know, normally you're quite detached from what you're talking about if it's like natural disasters and things, but we watched a documentary and it had interviews with people who were actually affected by a tornado in, I think it was Indonesia, and a dad was talking about how many children died, his children that had died, and he tried to save them. And that was the first time where I was like, oh my God, like these are real people. They have families, you know, their whole lives have been changed by these natural disasters. And same goes for climate change, all the different things, you know, floods and drought and landslides, you know, just all of it heavily impacts people and can leave them with PTSD, you know, all kinds of problems. Yeah, that was a really good point. Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, in about one or 2 years ago in Kenya, big rain came in a place called Rift Valley and continued for a long time and created a lot of floods. And these floods increased so much so that they became like lakes and small seas or oceans, and occupied places which were normally or traditionally inhabited by people and livestock. And these areas that were submerged in water are not small areas. It is big acreage of lands and farms and villages and towns. And what happened is all the homes were destroyed, and the farming was destroyed, and the people on their own effort and with help from the government and Red Cross and other people, they were moved from places where they used to call their homes and placed in new places where they did not have connections, because they were put in strange places where it was like a refuge. They were taken into a refuge in new places. And what happened is that this water changed the way the terrain, the way the habitation of that section, because it destroyed systems, schools, structures, everything. And so these people became refugees in their own country. And what my concern is how these people could connect their sufferings to climate change, because I think to them, although this is a natural thing, I think they would have no level of conceptualizing or linking what we are calling climate change to their sufferings.
Right. Okay.
I think they blamed maybe nature, God, and those type of things. And the other people they blamed are the big people, the people who own a lot of property and who are placed in good places and who have all the wealth and things like that. So although these people got a lot of mental problems, I can't understand how they would connect their suffering to climate change, because the way we know it, climate change is caused by people who are able to produce a lot of carbon and change the temperatures of the world and big machines and so on. And these people, although they are at the receiving end of the suffering of the climate change, they have no connection on how the problems of climate change are caused. And this is the problem, because even when you tell them, you want to tell them, to empower them to plant some trees or do some things like that, I think that will not make an impact of any kind. Yes, they receive the negative impact of the climate change, but in terms of mitigating the climate change, I think their connection is very limited. That is,
yeah.
So that's, I said myself, the answer I put is, I'm not sure. And it is because of the explanation that I have given.
Yeah, no, that I really agree with that. Yeah, two things. The people who will be most heavily impacted by climate change are the same people who have contributed to it the least. They have not contributed to it nearly at all, and they will be the most impacted. And secondly, yeah, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently on climate change, and one mentioned, and I thought this fact was fascinating, that in California, the amount of people gaming is using more fossil fuel energy than the entire continent of Africa, which just puts it into perspective, how little fossil fuel energy Africa is using. They are not contributing. First world countries are using all the energy, and third world countries are going to suffer the consequences of that. They are going to have the problems. They are going to, lose their livelihood, maybe lose their families. They're going to be refugees, so on. Yeah, so I fully agree with what you're saying. But yeah, I do think, though, just because they don't know that what they're experiencing is an effect of climate change doesn't mean that they're not being affected by climate change. It's still impacting them, even if they don't realize or identify that that's what's happening. No one, they can't avoid being affected by it, and how they view it will not change the fact that they are being affected by it. But yeah, thank you, Ben. That was really insightful. Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts about that as well?
Simply, a lot has been said. And what I'm going to say is, whatever affects or impacts on you not meeting your needs affects your behavior as well. So if there's a drought and I can't feed my family, I can't, I'm starving, I won't be rational, isn't it? And that will lead on to me behaving abnormally, hitting somebody or violence or whatever. People behave differently, when they are affected in various ways. And if you are not rational, it will end up doing something that you normally don't do. So whatever affects our needs impacts on our behavior as well. So there may be violence in the home or wherever. You can take it on anybody. And recently we saw on the TV in Afghanistan, people selling their babies to feed themselves. It may not be climate change, but war and other stuff as well. So if you can't feed yourself, you can't meet your physiological needs, you become desperate and you do all sorts of things you wouldn't normally do in normal circumstances. So I think behavior is affected, leading to domestic violence and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, in general, when there are times of hardship or stress, domestic violence goes way up. We probably all heard about, when England loses, domestic violence goes way up, which is obviously a lot more small potatoes than, starving. But yeah, times of stress definitely leads to that. And starving will put you in a desperate place where you'll do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really good point. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything, or shall we move on? Oh yeah, Annette.
I was just sort of thinking that, of course, all of this will impact on people, and as I think it was Grace who said about, if you're not able to feed yourself, and people do things when in desperate times, things they would not have been able to do, they wouldn't have thought of doing. But when they're under these pressures and stress, they do tend to do things that they wouldn't even thought of doing. But so how do we mitigate these things? So the people who are in areas where it's been flooded out, what is happening within those countries? What are their governments doing to try and, what educational needs, even going into a village? And as someone mentioned, I think it was the doctor who mentioned that, planting trees and all of that, if it's somewhere where, forestation's been decimated, where, and we know what it, without the forests, you can't breathe. And of course, that doesn't help our climate when it's all cut down in different areas. I mean, was it in Brazil they had that awful flood not lately, because they've cut down a lot of their trees, part of the forest is gone. So it's again, it's we have to educate each other and talk about what is happening and how it's affecting what, when one thing's happen in Brazil, it will affect us here. Or, we all interlinked, the air, we haven't got any boundaries in the air, have we? We just flow, isn't it? When there's a storm in the Americas, it end up here, so we have no boundaries. So we all have to be enlightened to that. And so the persons who are in that country where the flood came and all of that realize it's not anything that they particularly did in that country.
Yeah,
it's it affects from one corner of the world to the other. The ice caps are melting, there's all sorts of different things that's happening there. So it's educating each other and maybe having discussions like this, so people can really think about what's actually happening and how it interlinked, how we all interconnected in one way or another, because what happened in the Americas yesterday will come to Europe tomorrow. So, and vice versa. So yeah, it's just talking more about it and make people be aware that it's not specifically their fault. They haven't done anything wrong. Why that's happening to them. It's just that you got to be aware that it is happening and it can affect you, and what you can do to mitigate your circumstances if you have the opportunity to do so. Really, that's what
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, what you just said really reminded me of something you learn about in geography, positive and negative feedback loops. So basically what you were saying about like the whole world being interconnected in that way, it's sort of similar. So like, you know, if we release fossil fuels and it warms the earth and the ice caps melt, that is going to make the warming of the earth worse. Like, so once the ice starts melting, there's this thing called albedo, which is about the way that the like sun and like the way that the earth is heated. There's less ice, so the earth gets warmer, and there's carbon in the ice. The carbon gets released, the earth gets warmer. Because the earth is warmer, the ice caps are going to melt more, and so on and so on.
So,
Yeah, it all just feeds into itself. And yeah, it can make you feel a bit small, like you can't really do anything. But you know, like you said, it's about educating people in the ways that they can improve their circumstances. So yeah, that was a really good point. Thank you. Yeah, does anyone else have anything they think about question 1? So question 2 was, how much do you think human activity contributes to climate change and its impact on mental health and gender-based violence? And the majority of people said very much, 79%. So does anyone have any thoughts about that? What we call it in geography is anthropogenic climate change. Basically means caused by people. You know, climate change has happened the whole time the earth has existed. Climate is ever changing, but it usually doesn't change as fast as it is right now. So we call that anthropogenic climate change. Does anyone have any thoughts about this question?
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
I think it is 100%. I think everything about climate change is caused by human being. I think nature in itself has not contributed anything to climate change. It is all human caused. And I think this question about converting everything natural to benefit human beings in different ways, in making incomes, money, riches, and those type of things. I think this is the problem. And the fact that we don't realize that some of the things that we do to the nature are not easily replenable or cannot regenerate or come back on themselves once we have removed them. They go away and I think for a long time human beings have focused their attention on nature, to exploit nature and to exploit other human beings depending on their level of power, and exploit nature and other human beings for individual benefits. But these benefits are coming back to haunt all of us. The problem now, I think, is that we have not accepted responsibilities. Those people who have benefited from destroying or exploiting nature have not accepted responsibility. And I think this is the big problem. If they accept responsibility and return the money that they have made out of nature, they return it in order to build back. They fund, return the incomes in one way or the other. That will help. But to ask the nature and the people who have been exploited to be the one who are going to help build the nature, they don't have the resources, they don't have the power, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the knowledge, Absolutely. They don't have the expertise. All these things are with the people who have already destroyed or contributed a lot to climate change. So it is human, but human has have refused to take responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and you know, linking back to what you had said before as well, you know, there's this expectation of the whole world to go zero fossil fuels, despite the fact that fossil fuels are heavily influential into the development of a country, of a nation, of its economic development. And people are expecting these poorer countries to just be like, nope, zero fossil fuels, despite they haven't had the time to benefit from it. They haven't had that development that the rest of the world has been awarded. So, and even if these countries did increase their fossil fuel use, it would make the tiniest impact to the overall problem. It's the massive countries and the massive business that are making the impact. It is not these smaller countries that, you know, rightly deserve economic development. So yeah, I 100% agree. It is not their responsibility. They did not cause the problem. You know, they need to, you know, focus on having, you know, a good development and looking after their people. But yeah, I will move on. I just have a lot, you know, this is a topic I care a lot about. Chloe, Chloe, you have something to say?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, there's not really much about like the correlation between climate change specifically and human trafficking, but there's like a small bit about how like unexpected loss of land or families and being put into like poverty suddenly do make people maybe more vulnerable to being exploited by traffickers. And
Right.
I think traffickers do go to places where they know that people will be fleeing from like climate crisis, and also especially women who might be having like constantly seeking better opportunities when they're moving from place to place. I do think that they become more vulnerable to being sexually exploited or looking for ways to make money if everything's just been taken away from them like suddenly due to climate change or like natural disasters, which are obviously increasing because of climate change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I did think about that a bit when Grace mentioned about like how when you're starving, you'll do things you wouldn't normally do, like you're in a very desperate place. I was thinking like, yeah, that must link to human trafficking in those areas, people doing these things to survive, as awful as it is. So yeah, that's a really good point, Chloe. Thank you. Grace, when we first started talking about this this question, it looked like you had something to say. Do you still want to say that now?
It's okay. I come back. You know. Thank you.
That's all right. Yeah, contribute whenever you want to. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to say about question 2, the human?
Oh yeah. I now remember. I was going to say we do drive a lot when we can walk. So we are contributing, you know, the fuels from our cars and all that contribute to whatever. But that, you know, as up to what Dr. Kanina said, that, you know, we cause all these problems. Yeah. We do drive a lot when we can walk and that sort of thing. So we do contribute a lot to this climate change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And it might be a good time to talk about eco-anxiety, which is something that I thought that we would probably touch on a bit in this conversation. Yes. You know, people putting a lot of guilt on themselves, feeling entirely responsible for the state of the climate, and, you know, doing everything you can or putting so much pressure on yourself. It creates a lot of anxiety about, you know, about what you can do.
No, I was just gonna chime into that. Yeah, that was good that you actually came in. And I think Cicely has a clip on this, so on the eco-anxiety. So I think we're gonna watch that and then we can come back and get a few more reactions on eco-anxiety, because I think it's something that's really important that we talk about. So
Yeah.
Cicely, do you have your clip ready? We can bring it in now.
Yes, I'll bring it in now while we do this. But I love the conversation, the way it is going. And that goes to show that we need to consider to be ambassadors in being the change that we are all looking for here.
Have you ever thought about how climate change makes you feel? There is growing evidence that climate change can have direct and indirect effects on mental health and well-being. As global temperatures rise and extreme weather events such as droughts, fires and floods become more common, people directly affected may experience issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder, while heat waves are linked with worsened mood and more severe symptoms of mental illness. In addition, learning more about the negative impact humans are having on our natural world can influence our emotions and well-being. Growing numbers of people report being overwhelmed with anger and anxiety as they feel they have no control over the future of our planet and society. This is called eco-anxiety and is a particular issue for young people who worry about the world they will grow up in. Seeing the impact of climate change firsthand or through the news can also trigger feelings of loss and distress about the way our homelands and way of life are transforming. This is known as solastalgia and climate grief. Communities, healthcare systems, and governments need to have strategies in place to respond to these emerging direct and indirect mental health challenges. Imperial researchers are committed to better understanding the problem and developing solutions. There is growing evidence that taking action on climate change and engaging with like-minded communities can help combat eco-anxiety. Climate action can bring multiple benefits to individuals and society, improving the health of people and planet and producing a world that fosters our well-being. If we get this right, together we can create a cleaner, greener, fairer future. Share how climate change makes you feel and find out more about our research via our website or by following us on social media.
Does anyone have any thoughts about that video? That was really good, thank you. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. The climate grief as well. That's a really interesting concept. We actually did an assignment on grieving extinct animals. That was really interesting, the way that humans grieve that kind of loss. Nyasha, and your hand is up.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I never knew much about, well, I never knew anything about that, to be honest. But I think it's really, really sad that that's what it causes, knowing that like what Ben was saying before, the people who create a majority of it, they're the ones who have more control over everybody else, but yet we're the ones who are picking up the pieces, and then you've got people like that who are having to suffer because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cash, your hand was up just a second ago, but do you still want to talk? Oh,
yeah.
wow. Oh, there you are.
I was just going to mention that you've got it's called, I think it's called SAD, seasonal affective depression, or basically depression caused by the seasons changing, and relating that to climate change, because climate change is obviously changing the seasons as well. That can also have an effect on people's mental health and well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I imagine because it's about the amount of sunlight you're getting. Just thinking off the top of my head about things that would like block out the sunlight that are caused by climate change, you know, there would be things like increasing storms and hurricanes. If you're, you know, getting even less sun, I imagine that's also impacting it. Ben, your hand was up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I think I noted a point in the video that seemed to show or to say that interventions into these things that are causing climate change may help in reducing eco-anxiety. I don't know if I got it right. And the way I see some of the interventional activities that are now happening in the world in terms of climate change include like solar lighting or using solar as a source of power. And my observation is that these interventional activities are very expensive to the extent that unless they are funded, it would be very difficult for the victims of climate change, those who are suffering depressions and things like that. It will be very difficult for them to access those interventional activities, because installing equipment, say to light a house with solar, the amount of money that it costs, unless there's funded. So my suggestion is that if from a global perspective, there might be a policy line suggesting that funding be availed to those who are victims of climate change, those who are displaced by things like floods or fires or those type of things, or their livelihoods are destroyed. There may be a fund like the one called International Development Fund that can purposely be focusing on the people who are mainly affected by the effects of climate change, because on themselves, even if they are trained or educated or informed, it will be very difficult to afford those services or those interventions that may offset the effects of climate change and the eco-anxiety.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you. Yeah, those are some really good points. Does anyone have anything to say about that as well? Because that was really interesting. Oh, Annette?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because if there's no way of the ordinary person making a great difference, yes, we can walk instead of driving where we can do all those other mitigations, but for the countries and that's been really affected, who had nothing really to do with about the fossil fuel, how it affected them, because they're just developing, and their countries are being destroyed with all the floods and hurricanes and all the other things that affects them. If the richer countries, they should be having some kind of funds to help those people, because a lot of them have been displaced, taken to places that they're not familiar with, lost their businesses, whatever they were doing while living their normal life, and suddenly it's impacting them, and they are not getting. There's nothing that I know of that's set aside, and if I'm wrong, for helping those countries and people, and the people who are refugees because they have nowhere to be, some part of, I don't know, should India or Pakistan, some places I notice are underwater quite a lot, and they've lost all their, their cattle and so forth. So yeah, I definitely think for us to move forward and say you make a difference, there need to be something there, because those people are not going to be able to help themselves, because what have they got? They've lost everything. And so yes, definitely, I think there should be a fund somewhere from the richer nations who profited from the Industrial Revolution, and they now want to clean up their act and send it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think they're the ones that should be making the difference there to try and help the people and the countries.
100%, I 100% agree. Even down to like where we send our our waste, our rubbish, we send it into these countries, and then they have to deal with it, and their rivers get completely just like, you know, full of our waste, and it's like, and now that's that country's problem, we don't have to think about it. It's like, you know, down to even that we are making it other people's problems, despite the fact that it's all coming from these like Western and like rich countries. Alkasha, your hand was up a second ago. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to add that like a lot of talking about like the UK and like the countries that most impact other countries that are most responsible for like supply and demand and all like a lot of rubbish and climate change. Like a lot of it is caused by the mindset of the society. I've like read some books on it, and it's like the problem is probably like deep rooted in the way that society thinks and the detachment that it has to our food, our like clothing. Like we don't see anything being produced, it's all given down to us technically. We only have to exchange some kind of money to get it. Like we don't associate people's work, people's like people harvesting and then like cotton and making clothes, or how much plastic is used in clothing as well. And then all that clothing gets thrown away, right? But we're like really detached from, and we don't see our impact technically, and it's not even really covered in news. Like occasionally it might be, but we're completely detached from the beginning to the end of the process. We only like have that small part in the time scale, but we don't see how food or anything is made, and then we throw it away, and we don't see, because we don't see it either because it's so tucked away. Because it's easier for us not to see, and then that way it's like this continuous cycle where we continue doing it, because a lot of like council, not council, but like a lot of like public projects and stuff is funded, and it's funded by big companies like Nestle, or like, you know, big people that promote their product, and it's like, yeah, it's just a continuous thing. So I think it's a lot in the mindset and the fact that people don't see how they have an impact. I know it's not right to like blame, it's not like individuals, people's faults, but it is like a collective mindset that we have to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was so interesting, and yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, that, and as well, the mindset of people I find so interesting, like 100% agreeing with what you're saying, but on like in another way as well, we have this like individualist versus like community-based mindsets, and I think in a lot of Western countries we're very individualist. We're like, well, this benefits me, I don't need to think about, you know, the people in other countries who've made this clothing for me. I don't need to think about, you know, the slave wages that they've been paid, and you know, all these things. Yeah, that was a really good point. Thank you.
There was a big.
Do you want me to mute myself? Okay.
So you can hear me. There was a big debate about Primark, I think, as Kasha, as you just said, in how the clothes is being made very cheaply, so people are wearing them very quickly, and how good is, you know, they should be made to last longer. Again, that's contributed to climate change, and I think there's a very big debate about that at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, fast fashion is like a very big topic of conversation, and like, you know, climate change, like aware groups talking about making more sustainable fashion. And there was the thing as well with Pretty Little Thing. Recently they had a big controversy about the, you know, the wages and the conditions of their workers and things. And yeah, it's nice that people are becoming more aware, but clearly we have a long way to go.
Also,
Yeah.
just wanted to add, I forgot to add, one way, something I read recently was about how there's like one of the ways that we can help and shift the mindset is through like small community work. Like this person that was reading suggested that we focus on like community gardens and community like places that people can go, like there should be more green spaces and everyone should have access to a plot of, even if small, like plot of land where they can grow something.
Yeah.
Not even individually, but like as a collective, as you said.
Yeah.
But yeah, that having that kind of attachment to even way of like, yeah, like the basic, like where your food is coming from and how much work it takes, you know, and having that close relationship with land is something that we don't have anymore. At least in this country anyway. So yeah, this person suggested that we should have like a hands-on involvement in the production of our food.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like two things. One, green spaces are incredibly important to the well-being of people. Just seeing, greenery, trees, plants improves like your mental health to such a degree that like, it's being capitalized on. Like certain businesses are like implementing green spaces into their offices and things to improve productivity and whatnot. Yeah, greens, and also it can improve your physical health as well. It reduces the risk of heart disease. The benefits are enormous. And Eva just put in.
Yes, I was just going to put in because it just came in very well with what you were saying. So we have the gardening, community gardening, which we run as part of Utilivu and Acre, and anybody is welcome to come to that. So we're going to be going every Friday, 10:30 to 12:30. I think this. So email me. I've put in the email address. So email me to see whether you'd like to come along, as well as near our office as well. We're going to be doing planting of trees and a bit of flowers outside. So rightfully, as you said, we can take the little action to tackling climate change through the little that we do. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that are we going to that as well? Us in the office?
Yes. So anybody who wants to come, it's all for your well-being, physical, mental, everything. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Kasia, for allowing us to go into that segue. Chumeka, is that how you say your name? Would you like to speak now about the things that you've been doing? Yeah.
Hi. So I just wanted to sort of like just talk about Breathing Space, which is a crisis service.
Okay.
For people who may be experiencing mental distress or are in a mental health crisis.
Right. Okay.
And it's an alternative to using A&E or other urgent care services.
Okay.
And you can make an appointment with us, or you can call, and basically, if you are feeling in distress, you can talk to one of our staff, being included in the staff team, about how you're feeling and what's concerning you. And we'll help you to understand what you're going through, and we develop safety plans and well-being plans.
Right. Okay.
And including coping strategies and things like that, and help you to navigate to local services and opportunities that can further help you in supporting you through the crisis. So, for example, with the community gardening project, that could be a way of connecting with people and experiencing that a different way of coping, especially if you don't have like a natural support system in place, for example. So we're based at Leon House, which is on Friar Street.
Okay.
So we're near Nando's and near,
oh yeah,
on that side near there. And we're open from Fridays to Mondays, 5 p.m. to 11.
Okay.
And you can, like I said before, you can call or text Breathing Space on our number, which I'll put in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. Awesome. Okay.
And you can also email in as well. With the details, I'll put it in the chat as well.
Okay.
But I think it's a service which could have helped me at the time when I was going through mental distress and in a mental health crisis, and I think that it's a really beneficial service, especially if you can't get hold, or like if you're not feeling comfortable getting a hold of the emergency services, depending on your situation.
Yeah.
Then I think it's a really good way of the entry point of getting the help quickly that you need, and the support as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Especially, like you were saying with the emergency services, I'm aware of, many people who've had, not great experiences with emergency services, especially in terms of mental health, crisis. Having a service like that probably would have helped a lot. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, please put that in the chat. Yeah, definitely. We can signpost people there as well with our, our mental health first aid training.
That would be great. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sounds like a great service. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, where are we going next? Do we have anyone, or should we just carry on with conversing?
No, I think we should. So we're going to have, thank you for that, Chuk. So please put your details on the chat for us.
Will do.
Thank you. We also have a gender-based violence champion training that's coming up on the 25th. I'll put that on the chat as well, on the 25th of March. So please do get in contact with me or Cicely and join a group of people who are already being community champions. And then we can help to get people's well-being better. But if nobody has anything else to say, I believe we can bring in James now. Unless anybody has something to say.
If James comes in, perhaps we have some time for another 5-minute video clip to reinforce all that information we have gathered this morning. It's a documentary from BBC. And just to make it crystal clear, the link that there is between mental health climate change impacting on mental health and gender-based violence. And talking of gender-based violence, Eva, thank you for reminding us of the training. This will be a training where after which you'll get a certificate, just to ensure, to make sure that you feel the confidence to go out there as a great advocate of really not wanting the gender-based violence in our communities. So we will give the information as we go I mean, every Thursday we'll be talking about it because we want to be more enlightened. It's a BBC documentary.
When the storm hit and the flooding began, I was terrified. I have had panic attacks because of my climate anxiety and climate trauma.
It would be impossible to overstate the impact that climate change, unchecked, will have on our mental health.
Experts predict that climate change could have an increasing impact on our mental health and put us more at risk of developing anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. That's because climate change is making extreme weather events like hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding more likely. These events can be terrifying and traumatizing.
Typhoon Vamco is the 21st cyclone to hit the Philippines this year. We've seen families on the roofs of their homes trying to avoid the rising water level.
In November 2020, Typhoon Vamco battered the Philippines, causing mass flooding. Heavy rain turned the streets of the capital, Manila, into rivers. At least 67 people died.
During the last typhoons, this river went all the way up to the top of this bridge. During Typhoon Vamco, I was outside when my mom called me and she told me, "Mitzi, don't come home. The roads to our house are flooded." When the storm hit and the flooding began, I was terrified. I didn't know if there was a home to come home to. I didn't know if my mom was alive or okay.
Experts say these extreme weather events, made more likely by climate change, can cause climate-related trauma. For example, a study by the University of Alberta found that adults who were caught up in the costliest wildfire disaster in Canada's history experienced increased rates of mental health problems. The Fort McMurray fires in 2016 particularly affected young people, with a third of 12 to 18-year-olds experiencing PTSD and depression 18 months after the fire. Helen Berry is an honorary professor of climate change and mental health at the University of Sydney.
You can divide weather-related disasters into two kinds, chronic and acute, and they tend to have different pathways of influence on mental health. So a classic example of a chronic weather-related disaster is a drought. Those kinds of disasters tend to grind and wear people down, and they tend to be more related with what are called mood disorders, depression, where we get really down. Cyclones and floods and fires, wildfires that get out of control. Those are acute disasters. They happen quickly. They go on intensely, usually for a very short period of time. You do see a spike in mental health problems immediately. So across the board, you get increased rates of general psychological distress, anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, suicide, ideation. When you're evacuated for a long period of time, so your home has been completely destroyed by floods and winds in a cyclone, then the risk to your mental health is extreme.
Experiencing typhoons like Vamco has seriously impacted Mitzi's mental health.
This is my room. I would sometimes wake up in this very bed and I would find that my room has been flooded. The floods would sometimes reach here. These extreme weather events impact my mental health in a way that I don't even know how to understand. Having the experience of wading through floods and seeing children's clothes floating and toys floating and not knowing if the owners of those toys and clothes are still alive, that changes you in a way. I have had panic attacks, having a fear that I would drown in my own bedroom. Even just talking about it now is difficult. It makes me feel hopeless and like life isn't worth living. That's why we have to talk about climate trauma, so that people understand that the climate crisis is already here and it needs to be dealt with today.
Wow. That may have sounded very far, Australia, Philippines, but actually it was only last week when most of us experienced that. I literally saw a lorry overturned along M4. So it's very, very familiar, and we can all do little things that, as they were mentioned there by Cassia, you know, the gardening, we have it every Friday. Yeah, right behind our, you know, our streets, and even in the office. If we can take time to go there for 2 hours and have a new experience with nature, it will do a lot of good to your own mental health. But let's hear what you think about that. And over to you, Eva and Alex and James.
Thank you, Cecily. Yeah, that was a really good video. Kind of reminded me of that one I was talking about earlier, where when you hear it from the mouths of people who actually experienced it, it is, you know, so upsetting. Ben, do you have something to say?
I think according to that video that we have just seen, climate change has put the whole world into an emergency situation. So what will matter for the way forward is building capacities of people and communities on how to respond to individual to respond to the emergencies, because I think this is going to be the order of the day in the way forward as we move on. So the people who cannot have the equipment for responding to emergencies of all types, then they will be very disadvantaged. And myself, I'm normally an advocate of the poor people. And I think from social perspective, the poor people are going to be destroyed both physically and mentally by the effects of the emergencies that come from the climate change more than anybody else. Because if you look at some of those pictures that was shown, the way of saving people, like in this country, when an emergency strike, there is very quick way of responding to these emergencies. There are sectors that are well equipped, trained, and they respond and help and save a lot of lives. That's not the same case with the poor people and the poor communities and the poor countries. And this is now the big concern on this effect of the climate change, because it is going to destroy those who cannot cope with these emergencies in form of relief, rehabilitation, recovery, and reconstructions. But developed countries like here, they have all the methods, all the equipment to do these things. So that is my challenge. How can I do, what can I do to help my communities sometimes who do not have these capacities, these abilities, this equipment to respond to emergencies?
Yeah, absolutely. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. I feel like, well, did we have someone else to go to? James, were we going to go to James?
Yeah.
Should we do that next? James, do you want to speak now?
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody. And seeing when I was listening to Alex, Chloe, Cassia, and a lot of other people, Annette and Grace, I think there was a whole lot of reference made to the development in terms of the difficulties and the impact of climate on our lives. And I've been looking at some of the studies people have been undertaking, and some of the things they were really talking about is a particular country, Bangladesh, where it's really quite low in terms of its level above sea level. So if the sea is increasingly becoming high, we're looking at 2050, it's going to be very difficult for that country, because it's like one day it will be overflooded by the sea because the sea level is rising. And people also talk about mental health issues also. There are a lot of other physical health as well. As the global warming become a problem, asthma, cardiovascular problems, and all of those things can also be on the increase. And there's a good relationship between physical health and mental health. So when one is disturbed, another one also need to be taken care of, because they kind of interlink quite nicely in that way. So we need to be aware of that as well. And when we be looking at the stress eco impacts, we have depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, people mentioned. But what about OCD? People who have frequent issues with nature, they begin to be more prone to checking out if the wind is coming, is that going to be next storm, when is going to happen? So that consistent disturbance to your emotion is OCD. You know, and we also been seeing how people have very specific phobia to wind, to nature, to anything, sunlight, and all of those because of the heat. So again, we're looking at all those developments. So it's not just around those main issues. We talk about depression, but all of those other disorders are beginning to become more difficult. And also when we look at the key effects, you know, change in the hydrological cycle, and we can see how that's affecting the whole world, not just Africa, but even here in the West. And the land is warming up, the air is also warming up, and that's also is quite typical of any climatic region we can think of this day. And the ocean is also warming up, and we can see how that can also affect food, seafood. You know, melting ice, you name it, rising sea level, ocean acidification, the acidic nature of the ocean is killing a lot of organisms in the sea. Global greening, you know, we need to look at all of those things. People cut a lot of trees because they can't afford, and they can sell those logs to make money. Again, that also is something that we need to look at. Changing in the currents also, and if you look at the ocean, all of those things can affect human activities. But when we put all of this into context, perhaps we need to look at what we need to look at. And so many people have been asking, like Ben was saying, what do we do? Yes, we need a lot of support, but at a local level, what can we do? So we look at the increased heat, we look at droughts, we look at the insect outbreak, and I think Alex mentioned that in her geography lesson, and also the human consumption also. I think Eva was talking about Primark and how do you make clothes to last for long. Again, everything we do, we have to be in moderation. If you also make clothes to last for long, what materials are they going to make that clothes that will last long will probably affect the climate. So we need to look at all of this into particular contexts. But for me, really, what we can take from today really is really around what we can do as individuals. How can we model a good practice? If we want to become climate heroes or heroines, how do we do it? What can we start doing at home? So it's really self-education in terms of what is your climate footprint measurement? Can you do that every day? How many times have you heat up your kettle to make your drink? How many times have you cooked? How many times have you switched the light on or watch telly or switch the light off, run your tap? So these are little practical things we can actually do here in the West that can begin to help us. And in a third world country, to be specific, sub-Saharan Africa, I've been talking to a few people who are refugees in this country, and some of the driving force really was drought. And I think somebody mentioned that. I think Grace mentioned that if you have drought, you don't have land to produce food because it's dry. Your food is not going to have water in order to grow, your plant rather, and then you don't have food. So where are you? Who are you? You know, so it's really important to look at those things. I think Kasia also mentioned, because there's no kind of awareness, we're not too educated around those climatic refugees. So we don't really appreciate their plight. You know, when they arrive, we probably say these are economic immigrants just coming to have better life. Even if that's the case, they're running from something that is disastrous. You know, a barren land with nothing to really grow crop in, and we need to live on food. So that could be a justification for them leaving that land to come to look for greener pastures elsewhere. So it's really important to begin to make those connections the more we make those connections, that can really help. Even when, for us Africans, when we talk to our people, it's really educating them, because probably they're not even aware. Most governments don't have that time really to prioritize climate. You know, they might talk about this thing during election campaign, but once they're elected, maybe climatic changes become something they deprioritize. They don't really prioritize. So we as a community need to help as well in terms of whatever information we can share. But coming back to us really as a community, let's start with self-education. How much awareness do you have of the climatic change in your own life, on your own life as a family, even in Reading, for example, or in the United Kingdom? Also, community education is also important, and this vital forum is important, which happens every week. But let's really bring it to our Wellbeing Hub along Oxford Road. And there are also other hubs coming up. I know there's a hub in Wokingham, which we're going to connect with. There's also one coming up in Newbury, which we're going to make connection with, so that we begin to really propagate the information, but also that hub awareness is really important, so that we feel that there's a drop-in center. You can come and talk about things, whether it's to do with mental health problems or climate or anything, you know, gender-based violence and all of those things. This is a place where you're free to come and share your difficulties, and also opportunities for you to share strategies that can help somebody. And we also need to look at how we can influence society in terms of what we'll be doing as a group. If we start to put some examples in place, for example, your office gardening or your back office gardening, or, you know, try to really transform your office space to be a little bit green. I think people can learn a lot from this. And these days we talk about hybrid working. You know, the nature of working today is completely wide range. Some people work from home, some people are based at their workplaces. So there's a lot of, you work as you go along. So that's hybrid for me. How are we doing it? Are we using too much energy? You know, because you might be saying digital competence is okay, but how much time are you spending on that machine? Are you able to get out and about, walk for a little bit? Even 10-minute walk about is good for the climate, because that can actually stop you from either using the car or using your computer or your mobile. You know, so it's really important to factor all of these things, because we think these are very trivial things, but they are really important, because the climate conditions started from a minor things, and somebody was talking about acute and endurance or chronic. So it started from a little drip, and now we're looking at the crisis. So we need to look at the solution now. So that kind of action for transformation is really important. I think that's what everybody really mentioned. That's action for transformation. How are we going to act? What are we going to do? So my plea really for us this week is, I want everybody to come back in this forum with something that you did that was really outstanding to you. You're not doing it for anybody, but outstanding to you in terms of how your carbon footprint was measured. Was it measured less than what it was last week? So this week is going to be less than last week. So that can really help us to be more focused. So that measurement is really important. And in life, if anything is not measurable, it doesn't exist. If you can challenge me on that, find the evidence and bring it to me. If anything is not measured, then it doesn't exist. Even when we talk, it's measured. You know, you have time to start, time to stop. So I'm going to rush up to stop now, because otherwise Alex will be saying time for us. Anyway, so basically, we need to look at all of those things. So I want us to start detaching from the problems, really. And I want us to start measuring, how am I detaching from the problem that is causing the climatic problems, and then start attaching to the solutions. We all have it. We all, this forum, even people who are not with us, they know what to do, because it's the news. We've had those 2 clips that Cecily brought. It's on the news. It's also in everybody's conversation. If you go to my village, they talk about it, but they don't know what to do. So we have to help people, you know, because we're very blessed to be here with good information that we can share with people. Information is so precious. It's like gold dust. You don't get it. So people are really struggling with information. So whatever we do, please, let's measure our carbon footprint this week and bring something to share with us next week. So I would like to take this time to say thank you so much, Alex, and everybody that contributed. And I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Don't forget the hall. Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention that we are doing a climate change project here at the Hub. We are doing some journalism projects, and we will be in Broad Street Mall, I think in 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. We're going to have a pop-up stall there. But yeah, I'm going to send in my email to the chat because basically I would just really like to know what the community wants to learn about, because we are here to educate people, to spread awareness about different climate change issues. So if there's something that's been talked about today, or just in general, something you want to know about in terms of climate change, we can, use our social media platforms to talk about that. We can write articles on it. We can bring it up in our stall. We're also thinking of holding like educational events, like, how to mend clothes so they have a longer life kind of thing. If there's any skills that you think would be good to learn, just basically, I just want feedback. So I'm going to send my email into the chat, and if you guys have any thoughts, please email me and we will take that into consideration. And also, yeah, just James had a lot of good points. That was really, really good.
And I can keep the chat open, and we'll stay on for another 5 minutes to just hear what people have to say.
Yeah. If anyone has any thoughts about what I just said or what James just said, please share. Mohammed?
Yes. What's the difference between climate change and global warming?
Climate change. So global warming is sort of like the overall global impact. So like the planet is warming, but climate has a smaller area. So like, each country or even within countries has different climates. So for some climates, they might actually get colder, other climates will get drier, some will get wetter. It sort of just depends on what the climate was and what it's turning into. Global warming is the whole. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes.
But thank you. That's a good question. We'll actually put it as part of the question. So maybe that's something we can actually put it on to explain to people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Does anyone else have anything about what James said or about what I said?
I think we're all good. So yeah, Alex put the email on the chat. Please do email us. Let us know what projects you want to join. But thank you very much for joining today, and wish you the best of your rest of your day, and have a good weekend, and see you all on Thursday.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.